let's start with a super easy question. Can you tell me your full name and how you spell it?
Yeah, so my name is Shilpa Narayan, spelled Shilpa, last name Narayan, Narayan.
And Shilpa, what are your pronouns?
And my pronouns are I go by she and her.
And how do you describe yourself?
Ooh, how do I describe myself? Um, I am a very hardworking, extroverted, um, woman of color. I'm very proud to be South Asian, very proud to be someone who allows other people to have a voice. I always make sure that people are heard, people are being their best selves in the moment they can be. I describe myself as elaborate, I think is a word that I would use because probably after this interview, you'll realize I have many different connections and many different ways of what I do. My resume is always way longer than it should be, but I just describe myself as someone who always wants to better and always wants to help people and be the best that I can be.
Let's go to the early days. Tell me
Okay.
when and where you were born.
Yeah, so where I was born has really is an opposite of this interview. I was born in Burnaby, BC. I was born at Burnaby General Hospital, but the thing with that is that I never lived in Burnaby or Vancouver. I've always been in Surrey. My parents lived in Surrey, have lived in Surrey since they immigrated to Canada from Fiji, my dad being in the 80s, my mom being in the 90s, and they settled in Surrey. So the only reason why I was born in Burnaby was that that's just where my doctor was. And then, so from my earliest memory, I grew up in Surrey, specifically in Newton. I was from kindergarten to grade 12. I attended school in Newton, lived in Newton, and up until 8 months ago, or 8 months to a year ago, I decided to pursue my master's somewhere else. So that was the first time that I left Surrey.
So let's put a date to your birth. Could you tell us when you were born?
Yeah, so I was born in 1996. And I was born in 1996 and I grew up in Surrey. I was a Surrey girl. Everything that I, know about Surrey, especially Newton, Newton, Whalley, Guildford, those were kind of the areas that I grew up in. My parents would take me places, and that's again, like that's my earliest memory.
Do you remember your school days? What school did you attend?
Yeah, so I went to Bear Creek Elementary from kindergarten to grade 7, and then not far from there, I went to Frankfurt Secondary from grade 8 to grade 12. Those were the years that really shaped who I was as a person. I think everyone's always kind of asked, like, what part of your life, do you think shaped you the most? And for me, it has to be those 13 years of being in school. Um, my superhero is our teachers. And so for me, that was huge. And I think I was also very lucky, and I give it, kudos to my parents for picking a place to live where it was so accessible. You know, the walk from my elementary school to my high school was under 5 minutes. So that was, I think, really, really great on my parents' part when they moved to into the place where they still live, and where I grew up. So yeah.
It sounds like an incredible place to grow up. What was that community like? How would you
Mhm.
describe the community you grew up in?
Yeah, so the community I grew up in was very diverse. You had people from all walks of life. You had people of all backgrounds, diversities, all identities, individuals. You had your nuclear family situation, and then you had other families that were unique, that were integrated, that were many generations living together. So I think from a really young age, I allowed myself to put myself out there and be open-minded about who I wanted to be, how I wanted to, be a part of my community. Um, and then also just see multiculturalism um, being celebrated from a very young age. I mean, in both of my schools, both going, elementary and high school, you had an enormous amount of multiculturalism. So we celebrated things like Vaisakhi and Diwali and Eid. Of course, your Christmas, your Thanksgiving. We had those things, but our school administration and teachers made sure that everyone felt included to an extent. Everyone felt like they could see themselves in the classroom, and if it wasn't the school doing it, in my experience it was teachers doing it, going out of their way to make sure that the students felt safe, that if they came up to them and said, hey, like, this is how I'm feeling, or saying that I might not identify like the rest of my classmates, like I was always there's always an acceptance, no matter what, even if they're like in this society they may not be an acceptance, because as we know, the Surrey School District in some ways was known, with James Chamberlain and his book ban, and the Surrey District did have a pushback against LGBTQ+2S plus community, but there were so many teachers that I had growing up that just made me feel safe and comfortable no matter who I was, what I did, if that makes sense. And I think that culture is really hard to come by sometimes. So yeah, so the community that I grew up in was just so multifaceted. Um, I remember even, when we would have potlucks, like you would get food from all cultures. There wasn't ever, you wouldn't just have, 10 bags of chips, there was always something different. And I think my parents instilled that also in me too, is to not shy away from my culture, being South Asian, so specifically being Gujarati. um that was the first language I learned before English, and um learned them simultaneously because my parents wanted to make sure that I was bilingual in that way, that I had my foot both in Canadian society but also making sure that I wasn't forgetting my roots. And I think that for me, like now as an adult, is really important for me, for cultural roots, but also roots of gender identity, and knowing, for me, always remembering where people came from before me. And I think that's something that my parents instilled from a cultural perspective, and I was able to then take that into other parts of my life and add that same feeling and that same respect.
That sounds like such an incredibly supportive community that you grew up in. Do you remember any specific incidents that really struck with you all these years?
Yeah. So, I say that, going to elementary school and going to high school was incredible in a way of the people that were there, the teachers that I had, the community that was built. However, with saying that, there was quite a bit of adversity. I'm very open in a lot of the work that I do, and saying that I've struggled with depression and anxiety in my life, to a point where it was quite detrimental for me, and that no 12-year-old should ever feel the way that I once did about myself. And so that started for me, my I call it, my journey, and my mental health journey started when I was in about 6th grade. And I always knew that there was something different about me in the way that I communicated with people, and the way that I was always selfless. I think so. If you ask someone that's known me for a very long time, since I was a kid, I think they would say that I've always been really selfless. And so there's one part of being selfless where, you give yourself wholeheartedly to everything, but then when you get to yourself, it's like you break. Like I froze. I didn't know what to do. And so with that, first and foremost, it was depression and anxiety. I told myself that I wasn't good enough. I told myself that I didn't, deserve the things that I had. I didn't deserve to, have the relationships that I had. And um, I didn't deserve to feel good about myself in any way. And that was in all facets of my life, gender identity, race, my abilities, everything on the chart that you can look at, I ripped apart. And my anxiety was so bad that I would basically go home, sleep, eat what I could, go to school, do that all over again. Like it was just a cycle. And then um it was, in I was in 6th and 7th grade. Like that's not a time where a young person should be so hard on themselves. Like that is a key part of figuring out who you are, but at the same time it's not about ripping yourself down. I was only 12 years old. Um, so, talking about the community and the adversity that I faced was, there were times where I didn't want to be around anymore. There were times where I just wanted to give up. And it was, teachers that saw that. And I remember sitting in a teacher's classroom for hours one day and just telling her that I don't know how I feel, but it's not a good feeling. Because at that time, really, in 2000, between 2006 and I'd say 2010, um, it doesn't seem like that, like that amount of time, but really in that time, there really wasn't a language around mental health. There, and then I mean, let alone, you know, uh, 2S LGBTQ plus, like nothing of that was there. And if it was, both of those things, I think, in some cases would go hand in hand because there wasn't that acceptance and because there wasn't um, knowledge. Mental health wasn't talked about. I mean, we had classes like personal planning and we had classes, health class, but not once do I remember it being in a curriculum until maybe in the last 5 years. And I've been out of the public education system for so long now. And so I went to this teacher and I told her that I don't know what I'm feeling, but what I feel I don't think is what I'm supposed to feel. And that was the first time that I realized that I was allowed to be vulnerable and that there was a power in being vulnerable. And this teacher, it was like her second or third year of teaching, and she didn't know what to do. And um, that's when I learned that there are some things that she had to tell my parents. And because the language wasn't there, like I was terrified. I was terrified. And my parents learned a little bit about it, but I still kept it in. I still was the student that joined everything. I was, like, I don't even play sports, but I joined every sports team that I could. You saw little Shilpa on that volleyball court. Could I volley a ball? Hell no, but I did it. But later, what I realized, is that I did that to run away from the voices in my head. I did everything that I could to run away from my authentic self. And so, that then went into high school. I went, you know, I was a student that was joining everything, doing everything, smiling, laughing to I didn't want any of it. I wanted nothing to do with it. I wanted nothing to do with myself. I hated myself. And that's something that is so hard. I mean, just the word hate, but then looking at it at yourself, like that's it, it's hard. Um, and so, I was in high school and I was just living this life that I was just floating. And this one teacher asked me, I was, by now I was like in the ninth grade, and she's like, Shilpa, are you okay? And I didn't really answer her. And then she said, no, really, like, are you okay? And that was the first time that I realized that there was a power in in vulnerability. And then there's a power in our authentic selves, even though the world may not accept it then. Self-acceptance is what's first. And that kind of started my journey of everything, really, like every part of my identity. It was hard and the community was tough. Sometimes community isn't easy, sometimes you will have a hard time, but coming out of that hard time and made me realize that, there's so many other people that if I'm going through this, there has to be other people. And that's what kind of turned my life around and to become this advocate for all walks of life. Sorry, that's like a long answer, but it it included so many different parts of me because, you know, yes, I put the work in and I worked really hard, but there's still a group of people that stood behind me no matter what, that I always make sure I give credit to as well.
Please don't apologize. And thank you for sharing that. I do want to get to, where you are today and
Mhm.
how you are doing the supportive work. But I do, before we do that, I want to go back to something that you mentioned, that community can be hard.
Mhm.
Could you elaborate? If
Yeah,
you
of course. Yeah, community can be hard. The world that we live in oftentimes is tough. It's not easy. Especially when you're wanting to be yourself. For me, there's this concept called intersectionality, and for me, I live in many different intersections. And the way that it's explained is, say, you're driving a car and you come to a crossroad. There's four different crossroads, or sometimes there's more. And in intersectionality, those crossroads make up who you are. Um, and then looking at it in a socialist perspective, those are the things that often either put you at a privileged stance in life or put you at an underprivileged stance of life. And I hate using those terms, but that is what the world puts it as. And so for myself, I'm born, I'm a South Asian woman. I'm a woman. I'm South Asian. I identify in the LGBTQ community. I've done so much work there that I'm very much, a part of it. I'm seen with a lot of groups and organizations, and then, I'm a young person. All those different things. I have disabilities, and so those all kind of make up who I am. And if you take those identities and kind of put it in the bigger picture of community, we're not in the middle, unfortunately, because of just generational trauma, because of things that happen, 4 or 5 generations before me. Um, Growing up in a colonial world, I mean, the thing that something that I actually realized not too long ago was, all 3 generations of my family, my grandparents, born and raised in India, it's a colony. Um, they then went to Fiji. My parents were born. That was also, while they were there, was a colony. And then they moved to Canada, which is another colony. So really, um, there's such it's intertwined and it's so deeply a part of my life and my identity that I can't not, you know, refer to it. And yeah, I mean, being brought up as a South Asian woman and then later identifying, you know, differently than everyone else is hard. It's hard, and like especially even, going back to like mental health, like it was not talked about. So it was hard at that time to be a young person struggling, but because it not being in the curriculum, there was no language around it. The only thing that I saw in regards to mental health was things on TV and people being medicated, people being hospitalized. You see, back then, now it's changed, but back then you really only saw the negativity, right? The pictures that were painted of the LGBTQ plus community weren't the way it is now, celebrated, loved, and a really truly integrated. There wasn't really an integration I found in some ways growing up. In my small circle there was, but not to the bigger. So in relationship, in relation to your question of how was the community hard, I think it was just hard to be yourself because there wasn't that universal education yet.
Now you've touched on something really important here, being this person who has to navigate all these different intersectionalities. How how do you do that?
It's a good question, Kieran. How do I do that? It's taken a long time. It's taken a lot of persistence, perseverance, resilience, vulnerability. Um, because like in my previous kind of answer, for me, trying to figure out who I was and trying to figure out how I identify was hard because there's my Gujarati culture, so how I'm born and raised there, my house life versus my school life. And now, I'm a Gujarati girl. I am, born Canadian, that's my nationality. But how do I mesh those things together apart from, and then yeah, just all these different identities. How do I bring them together and say this is me? And the word that we really use now, like shamelessly, like shame. Shame is a word that is so detrimental to ourselves. And I think something with the word shame and um South Asian families, there's a lot of this stereotype, but I think the stereotype is also based in what's called a collectivistic culture. So, a collectivistic culture meaning what you do is a reflection of your family, is a reflection of your generation, of your cultural generation. Um, and the opposite of that is individualistic. So Canada is a rather, or not even Canada, I would say North America in some ways, um, in its colonial aspect is individualistic, right? You have to focus on yourself, you do what you have to do, whereas then the culture that I was raised in is very much you're all together, and what you do is a reflection of how you were raised, how you were, and so that then brings on this extra level of this pressure, right? Because you don't want to do no one wrong. And for me, I don't want to let anyone down, let alone my family. Even though deep down I know that they're very proud of me and that they stand by me and my work and what I do, there's always that voice that was in the back of my head saying, am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right circle? Am I this is what I'm supposed to do? And a lot of that impacted my mental health, right? And so as I was going through high school, um, there were days that I thought I couldn't do it. There were days that I thought this was too difficult. I'm going to throw in the towel. And it was teachers that stood by me and said, no, Shilpa, you know, you are doing this. This is what you wanted. You are here. You're here for a reason. We love you. We stand by you. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here. They're the ones that opened my world to so much. And these are, individual teachers. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to go off of their curriculum um, and teach something else than what they were told to. But they decided that that's what they wanted to do, and they decided that they wanted to support students with no matter with whatever they came in on, right? And so a lot of my years, I never had an issue with my, identity of fitting in. I think my school was always very open. My teachers, specifically, the ones that I surrounded myself with, were nothing but supportive, especially in my mental health. Like they were the ones that there were times that I couldn't even sit in a classroom because my anxiety was so bad. And they would let me go, sit in the counselor's office. They would let me go and sit in the library. They helped me get through it. Um, and that was the biggest thing for me, was realizing that I want to give back what they've given me. So that's why I work so hard to make sure that students who are struggling, whether it be mental health, whether it be with their identity, I want to be there first because I know what it's like to be put last. I know what it feels like to not know where you fit in or what you're doing, and having all these voices in the back of your head that just tell you every day that you're not good enough. And so that's what really made me turn everything around for me. And kind of put myself in that position of wanting to give back.
I love that. Um, and that brings us to where you are right now in your career.
Yeah.
Uh, how would you describe this point in your career?
Oh gosh. I joke with a lot of people that I'm 27, but I feel like I've put in like 30 years of work. I always joke, I'm like, I'm ready for retirement. And then, the people who have been working 10 times as longer than I have, like, are like, Shilpa, what are you talking about? Um, no, but, in all seriousness, where am I at today in my career? So I finished grade 12. I didn't know if I was going to. Um, I remember I was sitting in one day, these teachers called a meeting after school, and they said, Shilpa, we want to chat with you. And again, like by the time I was in grade 12, like I was applying for all the scholarships. I applied to be valedictorian. I was, kind of back into integrating myself, especially grade 11 and grade 12. Like I felt like I had the strength again to be able to, start giving back. And that's where I found my group of people in high school at the end of those years. And so, these teachers called a meeting, and I went and I sat down, and I'm like, oh, like, are we talking about, X, Y, and Z? And they said, no, we're talking about the fact that you may not graduate on time. And that was really hard. Um, because at the same time I was doing so much, but I was still struggling. Because I've been someone who, and I'm very open with it, I'm not good with change. I think a lot of people aren't, but I'm one of those people that change was always really hard on me, especially transitions. And I can say, to this day, like I'm better with it now, but um, growing up, it was really hard for me to accept change. And so in that time, like in high school, like I had done so much for myself, for others. You know, at the same time, I was losing myself. And so these teachers, they didn't have to, but they came together and said, we're going to help you cross that stage. And they did. They did everything that they could to make sure that I was still holding strong till the end. Um, and then I had this a therapist and I started going to therapy very young, and I was sitting in a therapist's office one day, and I was having a really hard time. And you know I'm like, I don't know where I fit in. I don't know, what's there for in life for me. I think I'm forever going to be stuck. I'm forever going to be struggling. And she said to me, can I challenge you? And I said, I I suppose the whole world is, why not add another person to it? And she said, instead of calling instead of calling what you're going through a struggle, why don't you call it a journey? And I laughed in her face, and I said, when I think of journey, I think of, you know, unicorn, butterflies, everything positive that you could, it's a journey. And she said, no, when you call something a struggle, you're giving it that negative power. And she's like, but when you call something a journey, it means that you're still always going forward no matter what. And that was kind of the day that that's kind of what sealed it for me, and said that, you know what, like, exactly, like, okay, like, this is where I'm going to go with my life. And so that was kind of really the start, I would say, to the kind of career that I wanted. I knew that I always wanted to help people, um, but I didn't know exactly how. Um, and so, the last few years of high school, especially grade 12, I was able to do a lot. I was able to help out a lot with the different causes, with different initiatives. And so that then led me into wanting to study something along the lines of, whether it was um, like something with socialism, something with psychology, somewhere in there, because I knew that there would be something for me. And it was in my grade 12 year, I started to do a lot of my activism within the LGBTQS plus community. And it was in my school that we were the first school in Surrey to have the Pride Parade. And that was something that was huge. It was 2014, not a lot still happening. Um, but that's what made me realize I wanted to be an activist and an advocate, and that's what I wanted to do professionally. I wanted to make it a part of my life, and I wanted to somehow make a living out of it. And being, the person that helped to spearhead that was wild, because it's something that, with my mentor, Melanie Schuer, in high school, she ran a group, called Global Issues, and there was a good chunk of us that were in that group, and we did everything for all the different causes. It wasn't just, the Pride Parade that we did. We raised money for, children in Kenya. We raised money for violence against women. We learned about colonialism. We learned about residential schools. We went to marches for that. Like, she helped me get such a global perspective, so that when we did that, it was crazy to think that we were the first school. We created the initiative. We were so excited about it. We're like, wow, we get to represent all different people. We get to really put it out there that we are a safe space. And then halfway through it, we're like, wait, we're the first school in Surrey to do it. And little did we know, like, we had the Surrey Now leaders show up, we had reporters, and I still have a news clipping of it. We were there on the news, as the first school in Surrey. And that was really cool. I think that really put it into perspective how much I could do in my life, for myself and for others. So, you know, and with that, it also made me realize that I think there is something else out there that is a bit outside of the margins that I can study and specialize in. And so when I graduated, I got accepted to Simon Fraser University, where I initially wanted to go into psychology. Um, but I also had a love for social justice, and then my other love is theater. So, and that was another part of my journey. A quick, a side note is another thing that really saved me in school was theater and drama, because that was the one place that I was able to go and just drop what I was feeling that day, and go into someone else's shoes. But that was also how I learned what it felt like to be different people in the world. And I think drama and theater is what really opened my eyes. So when I was in the 10th grade, I actually asked my drama teacher, I'm like, is there such a thing that, like, I can do drama but help people at the same time? Like, there has to be something. And then later did I realize that there's such a thing called drama therapy. And so I knew, going into when I got accepted into at Simon Fraser University, I knew that I wanted to take some sort of a route that had to do with theater, psychology, but social justice at the same time. But I really kind of wasn't sure. And then on top of that, it was really hard, um, to start something new, right? Like I said before, change was so hard for me. Um, and then I found the Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies department of SFU. And I took my first ever class that first semester called, Gender 101. And I fell in love. That's where I knew I wanted to finish. That's what I wanted my degree in. And so it took me 7 years, but a lot of incredible highs and a lot of lows. I was able to get my Bachelor of Arts degree in Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies. And in that time, it allowed me to grow my identity, and it allowed me to, um, be who I wanted to be in those circles. And was really neat is that, even, being a gender, sexuality, and women's studies student, I was able to see so much more of the world. It's a tiny department. We're strong but mighty. And I was given so many different opportunities. I was given, many opportunities, and we'll chat more about the projects I did, but I got to meet so many different people. Um, in 2016, I marched with the Prime Minister in the Vancouver Pride Parade. That was, a huge highlight, and that was all because of the work that I was doing as a student. And so in 2021, I graduated with my BA. But in that time, and my career wise, I've done a lot of work in a lot of different places based on opportunities I was given. So since I was 16, I've been working frontline mental health and addiction. So another place in it's Wally is a very special place in my heart. I worked on 135 A Street for many, many years, working with, again, a huge population. So I worked the front line of the opiate crisis for many years, and I still do. And then alongside that, I worked with a lot of LGBTQ plus youth, and gave them opportunities, art opportunities, and things like that. And I was also able to work in theater. So I really was able to kind of put my foot in all the different places that I wanted to be, hence my comment in the beginning of I'm kind of here, there, and everywhere. Um, and so those are all the kind of things that built me and built my backbone. Many years of speaking, of sharing my story, going into places and giving educational workshops of what it's like to be, um, a South Asian woman living in Canada, being a part of, this movement. And yeah, and it's just been really special. And not without, a lot of hard work, sweat, tears. And then recently I was able to, I've now started my master's degree, and I'm, so grateful for that. So I'm doing my master's degree in drama therapy. Who would have thought? I think for me, that's a huge thing when I looked up opportunities for myself, because I knew, I mean, I was, doing my bachelor's degree, but I didn't really know what the next step would be. And I just happened to get on Google one day and type in what the opportunities were, and there it was, a master of arts degree in drama therapy. And so that's what I'm pursuing at the moment. And then alongside my career of still kind of working as an advocate, working as both, LGBTQ plus mental health, et cetera, advocate. And then yeah, but it's taken me a while to get here, but I'm really happy with where I am and what I've been doing and the things I've been able to do in that time. Like when we're chatting and I'm sharing the things that I do, it's not necessarily for me to be like, hey, like this is what I've done, this is what I've done. It's more of this is what I've done with my community. And it just makes me feel really fulfilled.
I mean, we shouldn't shy away from things we've done because uh, it's such an incredible thing. You do some. It's a two-way street. You do something, but it also nourishes you. Uh,
Definitely.
so I want to go back to Pride in Surrey schools.
Hmm.
Uh, it sounds like there was a lot of support. Did you face any pushback at the time?
Mhm. Yeah, so this was in 2014. And at that time, in terms of the culture in the Surrey School District around LGBTQ plus communities and curriculums, and because like SOGI was not a thing then, the sexual orientation, gender identity booklet, and like the pamphlets and the curriculums, none of that was very, very early. And so us being a school that wanted to do it definitely came with questions, not necessarily questions from the community, but we were questioning where it said, it was unfortunate, but we did think, are we safe, is it okay for us to do this, on what scale do we want to do it? So we still did have to think about the parameters in which we were going to do this in. And there was about four of us students that we really wanted it to happen. Some of us, allies, and some of us the part of the community. It was really important that we did something to ensure that we are a safe place, we are a safe school. And maybe there were students that weren't a part of our global issues club that were in the school that maybe, weren't out and were terrified to come out, but we wanted to somehow display some sort of a solidarity. And that's how the idea came up. And we didn't want to do anything huge in your face. What we decided to do was we took a lunchtime, which is about 40 minutes, and we made signs, we made posters, and we walked through the school. And so the way that the school is built is that there's 3 floors. Can you hear dogs in the background?
Just a little bit, not too
Okay,
bad.
okay. And so, with that, we had 3 floors, and each floor is like a square. So we would march around each floor with our posters and our banners, and nothing huge, nothing, in your face, but just a statement, to say, "We're here, we're not going anywhere. This is the culture that we're building." And so initially, when we had this idea, of course, we had to go through our administration, and we had to ask, not necessarily permission, but we had to let them know that this was something that we were doing and that we needed their support. It wasn't really a, can we please have your support? It was a, we need your support. We need you, as an, I think there was like 3 vice principals and a principal. And we told them that we need to do this for our school. We need to do this for our students. Um, and we need for you to help us ensure that our students are safe while we do it. And at first, they were a little hesitant. They weren't hesitant for the idea of us doing it, but they were hesitant for any sort of feedback that we would potentially get. Um, but rest assured, they told us that they would stand on each floor, and they would keep an eye out, and they would um, support us in what we were doing. And so that was huge in that time, because again, there weren't schools weren't doing, I mean, schools were probably doing it in very small ways, but nothing like this was done, and so, we were also excited that we had, the official check mark to go ahead and do it. So we started creating posters, we started getting rainbow decorations, we uh, dressed up. I remember we were like covered in face paint, and we were decked out in rainbow, and it was really special. And we marched the hallways, and asked people to join us if they felt comfortable. Um, and we had, our administration was there if something had happened. Nothing did. That doesn't mean that maybe, some people had things to say under their breath or things to say, but nothing was done against us. And then next thing you know, like I said, the Surrey Now leader came, and I believe it was Tom Zillich at the time, and he wrote an article about us, and got a photographer to come. And it's a really great picture of all of us. There was at least 30, 35 of us in that group that were able to. And what started off as like a group of 5 of us that have thought about this idea with our teacher. Um, we then expanded, and it was really special because as we were walking through the hallways, other students that felt safe joined, and after that, having our meetings, we had a few more extra people because they knew that they could, maybe they didn't even want to be a part of our group, but they knew that that was a safe space during lunch. So that was really, really neat. In terms of, the pushback, it was more so of, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure that you're not going to put yourself in a position of danger, is kind of what came back from. There were teachers that did not support us. There were teachers that decided to stay in their classrooms and keep their doors closed, because we had encouraged teachers to come out of their classrooms at lunch and stand in the hallway as solidarity. But also, we put it in the hands of the teachers to also keep us safe. Um, first and foremost, that's what we had asked of teachers. We said, you don't need to do anything, you don't need to participate, but please just stand there, and that's how you are participating. And so majority did. There was a few that didn't, and there were a few that did let the administration know that this was something that they were not supporting or they were not comfortable with. And at that point, I think it was just dealt in a matter between administration and that teaching staff. Our teacher really made sure that none of that came to us directly, which I thought was really, really kind, and really, I don't know, it was just it was just really nice to know that someone was there for us wholeheartedly, no matter what. And if any pushback did come, she would deal with it, and the administration would deal with it, and would not come up to us students. And I didn't feel it. I heard that there were a few things, like the teacher that, didn't want to participate and, did not open their door and come out. And that's okay. You're not, in life, we're not going to get everyone that's going to accept various different identities. It's just not how it's going to be, unfortunately. But it's what the people that do with that makes all the difference, right? Um, yeah. So overall, I think it was really, really special, especially since, it was almost 10 years ago and we're still talking about it today. So,
Absolutely. And your activism and advocacy work, started there, and you mentioned you went to Simon Fraser, and you've been writing for multiple publications, and you've been uh, doing advocacy work in so many different ways. Uh, you, you've told us how you got involved in Simon Fraser, uh, but how did advocacy work at Simon Fraser and you writing for publications, how did that start?
yeah. So it's something that I still sometimes sit here today and I'm like, wow, like I have journal publications. I have articles and books. So how all that started was I started my Bachelor of Arts degree in 2014, and I decided after taking that one class in gender, sexuality, and women's studies is that I wanted to declare it as my major, and that's what I was going with. Um, so it was pretty much like in my second semester that I walked over to my academic advisor and I said, please put this as my major. And she's like, are you sure? Like, there's other stuff too? And I said, no, like, this is what I want to do. Like, the first course that I ever took is what, everything I've ever wanted and more. And so that started, my journey in getting my degree. And in that, I met some incredible mentors that really showed me more than just academics. And so I got involved with Professor Jen Marchbank, and she was my one of my professors very early on in my degree. And she and her wife, Sylvia Trefan, run an organization called Youth for a Change. And Youth for a Change is a Surrey Newton base. That's the other awesome part. It was right down the street from my house, based in Newton. It's a youth organization that they created to help support youth who are just having a really hard time, and a safe space, even with youth who aren't having a hard time. They want to create activists, they want to create advocates and change makers within the community and out of the community. So you can identify as someone who's in the LGBTQ plus community, or you can be an ally. They will take you in and just make you feel a part of this family. And so she was my professor, and I took a course that she taught called Feminist Action, and which really put my two worlds together. And she then introduced me to her youth group and said, this is a group that I run. We're all about creating advocates. We're all about community change. If you're interested, come and join us. And that's when I also realized that it just so happened to be down the street from where I live. And so that's when my journey started with that organization. And that was because of that organization, I was able to like march with the Prime Minister for Vancouver Pride 2016. And because of that because of Youth for a Change, I've been able to make those publications. So I'll talk a little bit about that connection. Um, so Dr. Marchbank is a professor in gender, sexuality, and women's studies, but also runs Youth for a Change. So when it came time for a lot of my different courses, she was teaching quite a few different things. And she was teaching what's called independent studies. So independent studies is when you can take on a project yourself and do that. So with that, I was able to do one project, but I'll quickly talk about the project I did first with Youth for a Change. So Youth for a Change really taught me how to be a civil activist in terms of talking to city council members. So that's something that she had, both of our leaders had us doing from, I was about 20, but our youngest members are 12. We go from 12 to 20. And so here I was, someone who finished high school, was started university with someone who is in grade 7, and we're both talking together, telling, city council, why isn't the pride flag raised? We learn to challenge community. We learn, but at the same time, we learn to accept and adopt community. So being a part of Newton, and so what we did was we created an art bomb, what's called the Grove. So there's the Newton Public Library, which is near the Newton Exchange, the bus depot. Behind there is a recreation center, and behind that is a forest. And that place used to be known as kind of a no-go zone in Newton. There was a lot of violence that took place. A life was lost there. And so for us as a community youth group, we wanted to change that. We wanted to make it so that it was accepting, it was loving. And so what we did was we did art bomb. And so we put art, we created art, whether it had to do with rainbows and pride flags, or it just had to do with humanity. We decorated that forest, and slowly and surely now, like, as we started to do that, another organization was built, called the Grove, and these, we were able to work with the community to host different events, to have people join our art, and our art was there. And if you wanted to take it, if you found that it resonated with you, that was okay. We had no intention of, we didn't go into it saying, oh, our art will probably get stolen, maybe it'll get vandalized. Those thoughts are in the back of your head, but we wanted to really empower our youth. And for me too, being, a young person at that time, to really feel involved in, especially in Surrey, in Newton. And that's exactly what Youth for a Change did. And so one of the key projects that, that now turned into a publication and worked with Simon Fraser University was the LGBTQ plus elder abuse prevention project. And that was done in 2018. So what we did was we teamed up with Dr. Gloria Gutman, and she is a gerontologist at SFU. And we then joined with us as Youth for a Change. And then there was another group called Quirky, which is the Queer Elder Writing Collective. They're based out of Vancouver, but we have very close ties with them. They come to Surrey. They have members that live in Surrey. And so we knew that, I didn't really know elder abuse prevention. I mean, yes, we know that that's a thing that happens, but really, just in the community outside of the LGBTQ plus community, we don't talk about it. Now we go to this community and it's crickets. There's nothing. And so a campaign was created with us and with the Queer Elder Writing Collective. Their group, you have to be 55 plus to join it. Okay. So that's where the intergenerational piece comes in. So you have a group of older seniors, individuals, and then you have us, youth group. So we got together and we created a campaign where we ended up, it was the first material in Canada to combat LGBTQ plus elder abuse prevention. We created 5 posters and we created videos, and these were like PSA announcements of scenarios. So financial abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. We covered those as different things that would happen. So we made a video about someone living in a care facility and that person identifying as transgender and not getting the gender affirming care at that moment, not even gender affirming care, but care at all, and so we made videos of that, hey, this is happening. We did financial abuse of, children taking advantage of their elders and their financial situation, and how all that plays, and even partners sometimes, and partner abuse. And so we really highlighted that, and that was an incredible experience because, again, we got to include people from all walks of life. We were now behind cameras, we were editing, we were creating documents, creating scenarios, and then we published these posters and these videos. And what was so special to me was that we were able to do town halls, and each youth got to go with an elder across British Columbia. So some of these kids hadn't even gone on a plane before, and they were whisked away to like Prince George to do these presentations in front of service providers, in front of other community members. And for me, that was so special because it put LGBTQ plus youth on the map for advocacy, that these are not just young people. These are change makers. And that was really special to me. And then the publication, I was able to work on this project not only as a youth that helped create all the videos and stuff, but I also was able to work as a research assistant. So I really got to take all the material and disseminate the material. And with the authors, so myself, Dr. Gloria Gutman, Dr. Jen Marchbank, Dr. Claire Robson, we were able to create a publication in the journal and talk about the creative process of this project, because it really opened doors. It really opened a lot to that. And then like the second project that I did that really, and then that had the correlation of SFU and Youth for a Change and my work as an activist was 1969 oral history project. So it was called Intergenerational Stories of 1969, and it was a project that I did as a research assistant working for Dr. Marchbank, but then also working as a youth leader. We interviewed 11 people across Canada who identify being in the community. And in 1969, Pierre Elliott Trudeau made his very famous statement that the state has no business in the bedroom of the nations. It was Bill C-150, and that legalized, or yes, decriminalized homosexuality. However, this project, we wanted to hear from people if that bill changed their life or not. How was it for them growing up? And these people, some people grew up in Vancouver or in British Columbia, some people grew up across the coast, so it was really spread out. And the stories I heard it just blew me away. And that was also, it was my second time working with elders. All these people that we interviewed were over the age of at least 60. I got to work with a really awesome group of history students in the Department of History at SFU, and they actually took this on as their final project. And so that was really neat to combine so many different departments. And then I was able to go back to my youth group, to Youth for a Change, and join teams with another youth group that had come up called Free to Be You, which was based out of Wally. So we were able to team up, and I took these interviews to youth and I said, okay, I'm going to record you responding to them. And so I recorded the youth having conversations about the interviews, the podcast that I created with the elders. So bam, intergenerational. And like I live by intergenerational. Like that is something that what's the saying that people say? That's the thing that I will die on, or whatever that saying is. That's me. And so that project, I created 3 different podcasts. I was then given a contract to tour my exhibit at the different Surrey libraries. So for 6 months, I was able to take it to Newton, Fleetwood, Guildford, all the different Cloverdale. Like I was able to take it across so many libraries and put it up and then I created a QR code that sent people to listen to this podcast, and then it had write-ups. And what was really special about that project, as well as the elder abuse prevention project, was that both of them also got time up in City Hall, in Surrey City Hall. I was able to hold an exhibit with Dr. Marchbank, my fellow peers from Youth for a Change, and be recognized at the municipal level was very special for me. It was definitely a highlight in all the advocacy work that I've been doing. And so I really give my hats off, and I really, for Youth for a Change, because that's what really put my foot in the door for LGBTQ plus activism. And being so much a part of the community, it really helped shape myself. And it really helped me make those connections, because now, I sit here and I'm 27 and I can say I have 4 publications under my belt. I think that I'm very humble and I'm very grateful that I was given those opportunities.
Thank you so very much for sharing all that.
Thank you.
Quickly, if we can go through just the dates and the years.
Yeah. So okay. So the years for the projects, or okay. So the Elder Abuse Prevention Project was done in 2018. I believe. And then, or even maybe earlier than, I think it was 2018. I will get those dates and we can add them. And then the 1969 oral history project was done in 2019. And so I might want to push the elder abuse project a bit further back, I think. And then the publication for the elder abuse prevention project was actually just published in this year, I believe, the last year or this year. In the last year, that publication was processed. So that publication took us about 2 years to do because we really wanted to make sure that all the young people's voices were being heard, that we gave the stories the utmost respect that we could when publishing it. And then in between that, there was a book that Youth for a Change and Quirky teamed together to write. It's called Basically Queer. It's a book of anthologies from elders and then poetry and spoken word by young people about having queer identities. So that was published somewhere between 2016 and 2018, I want to say. And so that book was also toured, and I was a part of that book in creating it, writing it, publishing it. And yeah, so those were kind of the dates that these big projects kind of took place.
Thank you very much for running through that.
Yeah,
I feel like dates are important when we are doing this
of
project.
course. Yes.
um, Now, you worked with youth, you worked with elders throughout your work. Um, as an adult, how does it impact your activism? How does it shape who you are today?
Oh gosh, Karen, what a big question. I could like write a book about it. No, but it's really shaped me into who I am today, working with elders, working with youth. And then for myself, I mean, I'm 27, so I'm kind of in the middle, right? Some people would say maybe less than the middle. I don't know, somewhere in there, but being able to see both sides of just people's lives has been so special to me. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the intergenerational work that I've done, um, between the Elder Abuse Prevention Project, between the Oral History Project, between sitting and writing spoken word with elders, and then, and today too, since 2015, I've worked with a very dear friend of mine, Pat Hogan, to run Bold Fest, which is the Boulder Older Lesbian and Dyke Convention. And with that, that's also again, people over the age of 50. But since I joined their team, now it's, people, women over the age of self-identified women over the age of 50 and their friends, and so it's really been able to for me to see so many different viewpoints and working with elders especially, and I referenced to this in the beginning of the interview as well. From a cultural aspect, it's so important to learn your prior generations, because if you don't know what happened before you, how are you supposed to make a difference moving forward? Unfortunately, we know that history repeats itself, but there are ways that we can combat that. And so being able to work with elders, it's a very, very special place in my heart, because I've learned things that no textbook will give me. I've learned things that no podcast will give me. I've sat hours and hours and hours with elders, not just academically. I've gone to parties at their houses. I've sat with them for tea. I've helped them, they've helped me. So I've spent so many hours and so many years with elders, and elders, from the LGBTQ plus community, elders who are allies, elders in my cultural community, and every single elder that I've met, there hasn't been something that I haven't taken from them, because I'm still young. I still have many, many years to go in my life. And if I don't learn where, my roots have come from, how can I be the advocate that I want to be? How can I fully embrace the future if I'm not learning from the past? And so, and even present, I mean, there's so much knowledge that people carry. We are all living history books. We're all living material. So why not use us too, you know? Um, and so I really cherish that I've been able to hold on to so many people's stories. And I really cherish that I've been able to see people in very vulnerable moments. That's something that comes with a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of forgiveness, a lot of open mindedness. And I'm very humble and grateful and lucky that I've been able to do that. And that, you know, because of the mentors that I've had. I've always looked up to my older generation and just taken whatever I could to make sure that my generation and generations after me have it as best as they can, because I know what it's like to be ostracized and put aside to the corners. And I just say, you know, from the time that I was growing up to the time now, there's in so many aspects we have moved forward, right? But there's always work to be done. And so putting me, you know, shaping into the adult that I am today, so much of that has taught me the importance of human connection, the importance of connection and conversation, because those two things save lives.
Now, you mentioned, you know, you've seen things change. Uh, Tell me more about that. How have things changed?
Yeah, I mean, this year is the first year that our mayor put up the pride flag. That's great. That's amazing. That's the first time in the history that's ever happened. And but prior to that, you know, I would say in the last 10 years, we have this SOGI curriculum that's come out, and there's so many teachers that have well, SOGI being a SOGI resource, sorry, in conjunction with the curriculum. Um, I know many teachers that were on those planning committees. I know many teachers now that are SOGI leads, and they're incredible allies. You know, they're incredible people for students, and uh, that's something that I didn't have growing up, right? And so being able to have that now in our school district is really incredible. Um, I also think, you know, having things like the pride display in Surrey City Hall in the atrium, that's huge, you know, for people to come and see that um, different communities exist and we're all part of Surrey. And now, you know, there's more open conversation. Surrey Pride takes place. It's grown more and more over the years. We have people from all over that come. It may not be the level of Vancouver Pride, but it's probably the second largest, you know, in BC, because of just the crowd that comes in. And no matter what, you know, how you identify, no matter what community you're a part of, there's always going to be some sort of a pushback, and no matter what you do. But it's how you move forward with that pushback and how you communicate with the people in your circle determines how you're going to, you know, push back. People will always be there to try and knock you down. um, there will be ideologies and ideas that will always try and you know, put you back at square one, but it's the people that you know that are with you that that brings that strength. And always know that there is a strength inside of you, and that anything, you know, you could do anything if someone has come this far. And I think that's something I tell myself a lot still. You know, there are still days that I struggle with my identity. There are days that I struggle with the work that I do sometimes. And if there's just harder days, and I tell myself that I'm stronger than I think. And I think that's with everyone. Everyone is stronger than they think. We don't give ourselves enough credit um, for that. And so to kind of, you know, loop back to your question, I am proud of Surrey and what Surrey has done to embrace multiculturalism, diversity, diversity in sexuality, diversity in gender. You know, that Surrey Pride and the Pride Festival is now held to the same regard as the Fusion Festival. You know, the Fusion Festival being this huge festival that's held to celebrate multiculturalism. And in that same regard, the city has now taken Surrey Pride, and it makes me really proud to see how accepting you know, majority of the city has come. And again, like I said, there's always going to be some sort of a pushback, but I think the pushback is slowly diminishing with, you know, there's more love than hate. And I think I can really see that. Back a few years ago with Youth for a Change, we went and stood in support with the Surrey RCMP, as there was the first time that they were raising the pride flag in front of their main detachment. And I remember it being a really rainy day, and I took a few youth, and we were met with so many protesters, just on the other side of us, and they were just screaming things and saying just atrocious things. And then the news showed up. And what I found really interesting was that the news was taking their interviews and taking what they were saying. They were also taking ours, but in knowing in the solidarity that our group had, it outshined kind of the hate that was there. And they were still, and what I found, that I was very grateful for, was that the RCMP took stand and said, even though you're protesting, we are still raising this flag. And so in those situations, it's not about who's screaming the loudest, it's who, at the end of the day, it's who's following through their promise of hope and of of inclusivity, right? And that's what the detachment did. And I thought that was really incredible to see. And I think, we do still hear stories in media of pushback and backlash. And I still do see, protesters that are standing with their signs in Wally. I see that. I acknowledge them. They can have their opinion, but we've gotten to a point in society where we're working past that, and there's enough of solidarity. And it makes me really proud to be in this generation now, especially with the upcoming generation of youth. Oh my goodness, like, they are such a force to be reckoned with, because I'm not very good with naming generations, but this upcoming generation, like, they're the change makers. They're gonna really be the ones that are gonna, take the status quo, twist it, and make it so complicated, that in the best way possible. And I look forward to that. I look forward, and I'm proud to be a part of, alongside that generation that can now cheer them on, because I can now take what the generations before me have taught me about activism, about solidarity, about sticking to your cause, and I can then now pass that on to the next upcoming generations that are just totally, I love, in your face. We're here, we're queer, we're not going away. This is what we're fighting for. Our rights, our healthcare rights, our voting rights, everything. And I'm really stoked to be a part of that.
Oh, that warms my heart. And you're so right about, I think they're called Gen Z.
I think so. I always get it wrong.
Now, you've mentioned this already. I feel like you've answered this, but I'm still going to ask. You've been a part of queer youth organizations in Surrey. Why are such organizations important when it comes to a city like Surrey?
The simple answer to that is that it saves young people's lives. Um, that answer in itself, for me, I think means everything. These organizations need to be there because there's going to be a kid at any corner of the world that's just gonna identify different than the status quo, and that's okay. And these organizations, I've seen it where, yeah, some young people have moved away. They've moved to a different country. They've moved across the country. Um, they've stayed in the same country. They've left the country, but they always still talk about their roots. I still see these young people on Facebook mentioning, Youth for a Change, mentioning the work that they did. And, I haven't seen some of these young people in 6 or 7 years, but I still know the solidarity and the camaraderie and that connectiveness that happened is something that is, you can't replace it. And so why are these, especially in Surrey, going back to the starting of our conversation, we are such a diverse city. I think probably one of the most diverse cities in the world, I would say. Just look at some of the cultural events that we have. For example, like the Vaisakhi parade for those who identify as Sikh. just as a little example, that's the largest festival outside of India itself. And then you have just other groups and other events that happen that you don't see in other places. And in Surrey, what I say is you can find there's something for everyone in Surrey. You might have to look for it a little bit. You might have to go beneath the surface, but it's there. Um, and so if it wasn't for, these queer youth organizations, I don't know where a lot of queer youth would be. Um, these organizations have connected with the schools. They've connected with different like districts. So now it's, going outside of Surrey, but staying predominantly in Surrey. And I've just, I might not be there in person in that group anymore. I support them virtually. I support them and see the kids now that are in that group that I'm like, wow, like you are, excuse my language, but you are badass, in what you are doing. And so these organizations are so important because again, like I said, they save lives. If I didn't find the group of people that I met when I was young, when I was in school, for me, school was my safe place. I wouldn't be where I am today. I don't even know if I'd still be around. And that's the same thing that these organizations are doing for young people. And I've seen it firsthand at how powerful these groups are and how important connection and conversation is because um, some of these youth that I once worked alongside, they were so they weren't okay to go to school, but this was the one place that they wouldn't skip every Monday night. They would be there. Anything that would be happening in their life, even for me, anything, if I was stressed, I was, not having a good day, I knew that I would go there, hang out with, my peers, and we would hang out, we would eat some great food, but at the same time, we would always be working towards something. There was always some sort of activism happening, even if we were sitting around eating macaroni and cheese and coloring books. Those coloring books were going to be an exhibit somewhere, And so, um, such a huge respect for these organizations and the continuation of them, and seeing these new groups come up and come out, and it's just really, really special to see.
Now, earlier you mentioned, when the flag raising was happening, there were these other groups that were shouting and protesting and whatnot.
Mhm.
Tell me more about these struggles. What are some of the struggles that are still very real today?
Yeah, I mean, always in life when you're gonna have something that is so successful and so encompassing of good things, there's always gonna be another side to it, unfortunately. And it just depends on how that's approached. And so safety is always something that's first and foremost. And some of those struggles are still real today. We know that even though Surrey has come quite far in terms of acceptance, acknowledgement, of all identities, there's still always that kind of background noise of disapproval, of disagreements, and some people more vocal than others. And I think people are allowed to feel how they feel. However, if it comes in the way of someone's safety, that's when it's an issue. Because there's no way we're able to shut off um, opinions that don't align with ours. I mean, I'm sure we all work in spaces that we may not agree with everyone all the time. We all will have different perspectives because we all come from different intersections. However, that doesn't mean we should put someone's safety in jeopardy. And there are instances that have happened where people's safeties has been put into jeopardy. Um, and it's really unfortunate, like the situation that I just kind of explained with standing at the RCMP main detachment. But I was very appreciative of the way that the organization went and took that matter. and they weren't allowed to arrest these people. They weren't allowed to, tell them, and they could say, please, move off of wherever they were standing. Um, and what we did was we were silent. There's a solidarity in silence sometimes, and we just stood there. Um, and they continued. They had their megaphone and everything, and we stood there and we continued supporting why we were there. You know, you're always gonna have people at the outskirts trying to bring you down, but it's what you believe in that place will make you feel safe, and connect yourself with people that make you feel safe. And when I tell people about community, people often ask me, what do you see as community? And I see community as, it doesn't need to be, you have 10 different people standing around you and supporting you. For me, community is one other person, because that person is there for you, and that person, in that situation, like that person makes you feel safe, make them feel safe. You've created a community right there. Um, and so there is backlash today, especially with the Soji curriculum. You have folks that are saying that it's not legitimate, that it's something that's made up. It's not. And with that, I mean, it's always going to be there, that pushback. And it just depends on how you, as the person in charge of things, go forward with it. And I think that Surrey so far has done the work, is doing the work now. Over the years, there has been some bumps in the road, but every city has it. Every group has it. When you have a group of people that come in with, again, the intersections can be a good thing, and the intersection can sometimes be something that kind of shakes things up a little bit. But it's the matter of how we go forward and finding those people that we connect with the most is what is very important.
I'm feeling all warm listening to you.
I know. I mean, like, I want to acknowledge that, you know, struggles still exist. I don't live a life full of rainbows and butterflies. There's been enough of adversity in my life that sometimes I have, told myself, is this really what I want to do? In my work, I'm also faced with a lot of grief in a lot of different ways. Not, yes, people physically passing, because I do work with an older group of people sometimes, but then also, working frontline for the many years that I have, um, it's hard. um, there's a lot of loss as well as there's a lot of gains. So it's really having that balance. And, all of that for me also hasn't gone without struggle. But for me, it's having those one or two people that I can go to no matter what. I can talk to, I can feel safe. And again, like, I just reiterate that, it just takes one person, for your life to be changed for the better. And I was very lucky that I found that in my mentors, along the years, and I was able to create an identity for myself that I can stand proud on.
Now, we talked about challenges, but what are the opportunities that you see for the queer youth of Surrey?
A lot. I see a lot of opportunity. I see from where the Pride Society is now to the scale that it's created its festival. I just see it growing from here on out. The youth, the Gen Z or Gen X that you said, um, they're just taking community by storm. I think a lot of our advocacy now is turning digital, which I think is so interesting. And I always talk to my elders about it. I'm like, what do you think? Because they come from a generation of holding a sign on the side of the road and marching. And we have marches, but a lot of that has now turned into digital. And I think it's really neat to see um, the good stuff that is happening. And I see the youth of Surrey to be loud, to be proud, to stand for what they believe in. I think there's so many uh, GSAs now across the school board. I think a lot of schools have it. A lot of schools are celebrating Pride Week, they're celebrating all the different cultural events. So there's always something happening. And also in in relation to that too, like really working with Indigenous folks as well, like that's really brought to the forefront. So making sure that Surrey, even like as a school district, is very trying to become like decolonial. And I think there's a lot of teachers that are also personally putting in a lot of the work. I also see that from different organizations in Surrey. And I think for the upcoming youth, I see a lot of opportunity for them to make a difference. Maybe even more than what I did, because there is so much, there's a lot more resources now. And I think a lot more of community building and kind of where we are in the world. There is more of a wider acceptance than there was ever before. We might not be at that perfect level where we live in a utopia. Unfortunately, I think that won't ever happen. But we get closer and closer to a world where people, in Surrey are feeling safer within their own, groups. Organizations are being built. We have tons of now resources and organizations for immigrants and refugees. And there's a lot of, those organizations include people of different, race, people of different abilities, people of different gender, sexual orientation, all that's being included now. And there's so many different support groups that are out there that have originated in Surrey, which I think is so special. And I'm really proud to be a part of that movement. And I'm really excited to see where Surrey goes with this generation.
Oh, that's amazing. And you've touched on all this, but if I missed anything, are there other forms that your activism take?
Um, More or less, my work, I would say, happens in a lot of different platforms. It happens in a lot of different mediums. It happens with a lot of demographies. But what I always come back to is the connection and the conversation. That's what drives my work. That's what drives my mental health work. That's what drives my addiction work. That's what drives my LGBTQ plus community work. Um, my cultural work, my my work as now a student therapist, like all of that, what everything, if you take all these layers off and you see me and its connection and conversation, those are the two huge building blocks for me and what I live by. And so I'm very lucky and I'm very grateful that I have been able to see so many different aspects and facets of life. My work has allowed me to travel. I was able to, present the Elder Abuse Prevention Project in Australia. Um, it's also been presented in Scotland. It's been presented in Ontario. Like the sometimes I don't realize the reach that my work has, and I'm always really grateful for it. And I know that um, there's more to this journey. And I'm really really grateful for opportunities even like this, and for me to sit down and have a chat with you. And I think it also allows me to become really grateful and proud. I'm proud to be a kid from Surrey. I'm proud to be a kid that has grown up in such diversity, and I think I'm really grateful for it. I'm grateful that you know there are some places in the world, in our country, that a lot of people, some people say that they don't feel safe being in, and might be a risk to some people. But I can say that the community that I grew up in, I was very lucky, and it didn't it didn't come without struggle. But I was always able to persevere forward, and Surrey, will always be home to me. So
What do you want the future generations to know about being queer in Surrey? Uh, what it's like to be a part of the LGBTQ plus community in Surrey today?
yeah, so what I would say for youth who want to be a part of that community, or want to be like me, an ally, and be a part of it all, is that don't stop yourself. don't stop yourself from wanting to be a part of something that might sometimes feel greater than yourself. I was scared to do that. I was scared to be a part of an organization. I was scared. I was At first I was nervous, but I always knew that I was someone that loved connecting with people. And so, you know, for whoever that is seeing this, um, don't be afraid to try something new, and don't be afraid to reach out, even if it's the one person that you feel safe with. um, it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to sometimes face struggles, but know that community does exist, um, that there is a safe place. I'm sorry if you don't find it right away, but it is there, and I promise that that community will support you, no matter what.
Love that. Um, Before we wrap up, you mentioned some important places for you, your schools. You mentioned the Grove. Are there other physical locations in Surrey that that impacted you greatly?
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely say, my two schools, Bear Creek Elementary and Frankfurt Secondary, huge part of my life. And then I would say, yeah, like the Grove behind the library, the Newton Library itself, where we would, have events, and where like I grew up reading books there. I grew up going there, and then in turn as an adult going back there to have my published work at that library is full circle for me. I think I can really say, being 27, I'm not old and I'm not young, but a lot of my life has come full circle. And I think that's really special, and really, um, I'm very lucky for that, is that I've been able to have many, many full circle moments. Other places like the wave pool, growing up and having my earliest memories there. Um, Going to like the arena and ice skating with my friends, going to the Tim Hortons on off of King George and 74th, and Youth for a Change. Many group members would create group, like an outside of youth group there, and hang out, and there's all those kind of places that I grew up around. And then, as I got in my teenage years, Wally, working there, being on 135 A Street and holding people in their hurt, holding people in their celebration, seeing so many different aspects of humanity, and then turning into going to Simon Fraser University. I mean, one of the campuses is in Surrey Central. And that's also, I grew up going to the mall there. I grew up hanging with my friends there. And then I was able to attend school, right above that same mall that I grew up in. And so again, that's like another full circle. Um, and then, the Newton Pacific Resource Center, which is now like the Newton Youth Hub. That's where Youth for a Change was held. And the first time I went there, I realized that was also the first place where I found my first therapist, was in that building, in that organization that Youth for a Change ran out of. And again, like full circle. And so that's been really special to me. And still, to this day, like I may not be actively in Syria all the time. It's still somewhere that I know that I can go back to, and I have kind of roots wherever I go, and having that familiarity is very comforting. And I'm really lucky to be a part of that.
Anything else you would want to share? Anything I missed before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say thank you for the work that you do for representing our community, in so many different ways. I know there's a lot of young people that also look up to you. Um, Myself, as a young adult, I look up to you, and thank you for continuing to have a voice for us, and on a larger platform. And thank you for the opportunity for me to share a little bit of my heart and a little bit of my story.